Okay, so welcome to our module number 5 for our Intro to Sociology class. And for this specific module, we'll talk about deviance and crime. So I hope that you have already watched the videos from Crash Course. And if you notice, a lot of the examples that were given there were US based. So for this specific supplemental lecture, I'll be going through the different concepts that were discussed, and then giving examples and contextualize them based on a more Philippine and Asian perspective. So basically, we learned that deviance is an act or a behavior that basically is considered as unacceptable in a given society or in a given culture. And of course, deviance can range from something as mundane as picking your nose in public or burping real loud in the middle of a dinner, to something very heinous like, for example, murder, massacre, or genocide. And of course, in the videos, we were able to find out that there are biological and psychological basis for deviance and why they're considered deviant. But for this specific supplemental lecture, we will focus on the sociological grounding or foundations of what makes deviance. So basically, deviance is understood by sociology as these three specific principles. So the first one, deviance varies across cultural norms. So what would be deviant in a given place may be not deviant in another. Probably, for example, wearing a skimpy bikini bathing suit is something that's deviant when you wear that in the classroom or in school or in church. But wearing a bikini in the beach won't cause you to get labeled as deviant, because that's a normal clothing when you are in the beach or in the pool. Probably within church, you would not find yourself cursing. You'd be very respectful. But probably among friends or peers, you won't be called out or considered a deviant when you curse or use urban language. Next, people are deviant because they are labeled as deviant. So it's based really on how society sees the act or the behavior or the thing that basically makes it normal or not normal, or deviant or not deviant. And again, the basis for labeling something deviant differs from location to location. So for example, if we go back to the examples on bikini in the beach and bikini at school, we know that in one location it's deviant and in the other it's not. The next is the audience. If you remember dramaturgical analysis, so basically the people who are watching you or are within that situation are the ones who are going to say whether what you're doing is deviant or not. Probably dancing crazily in a bar won't get you as much bad looks as you would probably in a church or at home. And last, it's the individual committing the act. So what is the status or the role of the individual committing the act? So for example, when a civilian or anyone, just a regular citizen, opens up the body, that is considered deviant. But when a surgeon, upon considering that this person needs a surgery and places anesthesia on the person and opens up the body to take care of some of the organs inside, that's not considered deviant. But they're the same act of opening up the body, but it's the individual is sanctioned positively for doing body opening because he has to do it as part of his profession. So the individual committing the act. And we also understand that deviance is based on social norms. And defining what those social norms are is related to who holds social power. So for example, when the ladies, no, in the LSU, when you go inside the campus and you are being reprimanded for wearing too short of a shorts or too short of a crop top, that is considered deviant based on, formal rules inside the LSU. But also, sociology also begs to ask the question, who put those rules in the first place? What are the social structures and social practices that allowed that rule to be an acceptable rule and to be enforced by the guards or the other staff in the school? So that is also a question of not who does the deviant behavior, but also who, what, and how deviant behaviors are labeled as such and are accepted and normalized in a society. And the ability to be able to sanction a certain activity or a certain behavior as deviant is a practice or is an effect of social control. And social control is being pressed upon people through sanctions. And we've discussed this earlier in our module on culture, that there are differentiations of sanctions. First is positive or negative. Positive being this is the type of sanction that you get if you perform good or you perform within the norms of the society. And then it's negative sanctions. This is what you get if you are violating the norms of society in order to tell you that, hey, what you're doing is wrong and you have to follow the norms. And then we also have the informal and formal sanctions. Informal sanctions being these are the sanctions that you receive when you break a folkway or an informal norm, no? And it's a formal sanction if you break or violate a codified norm, no? A codified norm like a law or a policy or a procedure. And of course, in Module 3, in Culture, we also discussed about samples of, positive and informal sanctions. Like, for example, when someone picks up, an object that has been fallen and gives it back to the owner would say thank you. So thank you is an example of a positive informal sanction to say that the behavior of helping out the person is an acceptable activity within the norm. Next, we have positive formal norms. So yun nga, for example, one of the deeply held values that we have in society is hard work and industry and achievement. And a norm for us to be able to show that is to be good in school, to perform well, to submit assignments on time, to perform well on quizzes, to study very hard. And the formal sanction that we give to people when they perform well, according to the norms of the school, is that we give them a good grade, and probably, and if they really do exceptionally, we provide them with awards and citation. And it's formal because the provision of grades and the provision of awards follows a certain policy or procedure that's a codified norm. And then, of course, if a certain person is violating or going against the norms, he would get a negative sanction, and it could be an informal sanction. Like, for example, you sneezed, in front of people and you forgot to say excuse me, and people will be giving you really bad stares. So that's an example of an informal social control, no? Informal negative sanction. Another example, is yung cancel culture. No, it's not a codified behavior. It's not put in the laws or in the policy that you're supposed to shame people for the bad acts that they do online, but we do so to be able to show people that this act or this behavior, when done online or offline, is not acceptable, and therefore we informally negatively sanction that. And then we also have negative formal sanction. So this is more of violating certain policies or laws. Like, for example, in LaSalle, if you cheat, then you get suspended or you get expelled. In society, if you murder someone intentionally, you get penalized. You get in jail. So these are also carrying out sanctions based on codified law. So for every social phenomenon that we study in sociology, we always view it on the basic three sociological paradigms: structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. So remember, structural functionalism understands that the things that we have in society that makes it work has a function and is part of its structure. So, which begs the question, is crime and deviance functional in society? Does it serve a function? Does it have a role in society? Emil Durkheim, as you remember, one of the four founders of sociology, argues that yes, deviance and crime has a function in society. And Durkheim argues that these are the benefits or the positive functions of deviance in society. First, deviance helps define cultural values and norms. Because again, if we see that a certain deviance is being sanctioned negatively, either informally or formally, we get to understand that yes, this is something that we hold high in society, and if we don't follow it, there will be consequences. Second, being able to look into deviance shows society's response to deviance and how it clarifies moral boundaries, throughout time. Yun nga, no, when we sanction something that is not proper or good, and we show people that this is bad and this is good, it always clarifies and re-clarifies to society that these are the things that are not good in society and therefore should not be done, or else these are the consequences that you will get. You will see that based on the sanctions that are provided to people or to groups that do not conform to that specific social norm. And next, these reactions bring society together. So if you remember, Durkheim very much supports the idea that cohesion is very important in society, and therefore we can all rally behind, negatively sanctioning a person who has done wrong. We all agree that this person who perpetrates rape culture must be called out online. So we can rally behind that person. The negative thing about, bringing together people to, call out or to negatively sanction a negative behavior is that, there becomes a demarcation of us being the right people and them being the wrong people, which of course flourishes or sparks, debates on racism, sexism, etc., etc. But that will be for another day. But generally, Emil Durkheim says that we can all increase social cohesion by agreeing that, certain people are doing something wrong and they should be negatively sanctioned in society. And finally, deviance can encourage social change, especially when we feel like there are too many deviant behaviors happening in the country or in society, and we try to revisit how that deviance must be sanctioned or how that deviance must be revisited in society, then we can change some of the norms, gradually or quickly based on the need. Another theorist who spoke within the structural functionalist perspective is Robert Merton, who argues that deviant behaviors may be because of what we call a social strain. So Robert Merton suggested the strain theory, and according to that person, a certain person is considered deviant when there is a mismatch in the cultural goal and the means that that person is achieving that cultural goal, or vice versa. And according to Robert Merton, there are five modes of how this could be understood. The first one is conformity. So conformity is when the person heads for a cultural goal, an acceptable cultural goal through acceptable means. So, ang binigay nga na example in the video is that if the cultural goal is success in life, then the proper social procedure and norms to get to there is getting a proper education, right? Doing well in school, being good to the different members of society, contributing to organizations, having a good character, and that would be your gateway to success in life. However, as we discussed, deviance can happen when the goals either the goals become unacceptable or the means become unacceptable for the person, and they pursue other goals or pursue other means. Now, for example, innovation is that they maintain the goal that is set by society as a standard, but the means for them to get it, they don't follow the society standard. So I am not sure if you are familiar with the site that I'm showing in this picture, OnlyFans. No, so OnlyFans is an example of a site wherein there's a paywall. You have to pay a certain account, and that certain account will provide. And usually the services that are provided by the accounts in this picture, in this site, should say, is sexual in nature. So it's either pornographic, etc. And especially during this pandemic, wherein a lot of means to get financial stability has been cut off because a lot of unemployment is happening, a lot of businesses have been closed or stopped temporarily. So for some people who still feel that the goal should be to get financial stability or to be successful in life, but they don't have the means to do it, they will get into deviant modes or behaviors for them to be able to achieve those goals. So for example, in this case, despite in some societies, despite sexualization and pornography as negatively sanctioned activity or a deviant behavior, they still went on and sexualize themselves, present themselves as a sexual manner in order to get money, because they still shared that goal to be able to become financially stable. But the means that they did it in a deviant way, according to society. So that's innovation. Pero don't confuse this with the innovation in the cultural diffusion lesson, ha. Innovation there is different. Innovation here, according to Merton, is getting to the acceptable cultural goals but using unacceptable or deviant means. Next, we have ritualism, wherein you still follow the means that is provided by society, but you don't care anymore about the goals. For example, you're just studying your lessons because this is how it is in society. I mean, yes, I know that people value success, but seemingly mas important na yung doing the things that they need to do in school, and they've lost the very goal of being a better person, being an academic, being a good student, and striving for success. So following the means but no longer committed to the goals. Next, we have retreatism, wherein the person or the group basically just gives up on the goal and also the means. So these are the person, for example, in terms of going to school, they just completely drop out of school, and just drop out of the goal of ever being a graduate and a successful person, although that is not equal, and going to school as well. And then also, Robert Merton introduced a fifth concept, which is rebellion, which is instead of not following or following means or goals, these people decide that the very system that creates the goals and creates the means towards that goal is inefficient and inequitable, and therefore what they want to do, instead of just participating in the goals or just deviating from the goals, is to be able to create new goals and new means instead. So for example, yung mga usual nating mga stories about success, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, the goal here is not, he changed the goal to getting a degree, to being successful, and he made new means in order to get that. So that's an example of technological disruptions are like that, no? For example, instead of the goal is, being able to sell your music as a whole, which is the goal for most music artists, the developers of Spotify created a new goal. What if we offered people the possibility of just streaming their music and just selecting the singles that they like, and basically also offered new means to produce, or to be able to deliver or distribute the music of artists. So that's an example of rebellion in the context of in the context of technology. But in the context of, general society, an example of rebellion that we can all gather around probably is, for example, EDSA revolution. No, the goal of the society during that time is to maintain its political dynasty, and then the means that were acceptable during that time is just to follow the law blindly, follow martial law, and eventually, people rised up against and said, no, the goal, we should change the goal to going back to democracy, and the new means should be a democratic government. So this is the role of the 5 concepts under strain theory of Robert Merton. Another example of a theory under structural functionalism is social disorganization theory, and it argues that crime is most likely to occur in communities with weak social ties and the absence of social control. So again, if you remember from structural functionalism, we talk about social structures, and also we talk about social cohesion. And people who belong in communities where there is not much social cohesion and social control, then crime will most likely happen there. And I put here a picture of a child behind bars, and there had been talks, in the last few years about decreasing the age of criminal liability to 9 years old instead of 14 years old, and considering that that children should already be criminally liable and be dealt with as if we would deal with adult criminals. And I find that personally problematic, because if you look at social disorganization theory, crime among children would most likely have been something that is not innate in them. It's something that they have learned in their community, and because of lack of cohesion. Because if you see communities that are usually labeled as, high criminal related communities, when you look at the cohesion about how parents deal with their children, how the neighborhood deals with the children, they are allowed to go out and about, there's not much social control applied, and we see that they're most likely to be the ones who will commit street crimes or petty crimes, then we see that, really criminality or deviance has something to do with the extent of cohesion and social control that a certain community gives to its members. Now we go to the next paradigm, which is conflict theory, and basically the whole thing argues that deviance is the manifestation of inequality in society. The way we look at deviance, the way we sanction deviance, is based on where the power lies. And C. Wright Mills, yes, the same C. Wright Mills that argues the sociological imagination, also presented the concept called the power elite. And C. Wright Mills argued that, a small group of wealthy and influential people at the top of society who hold the power and resources, whose decision may affect society, these are the power elite. And these are the people who defines what is deviant, what is criminal in a society, and how these criminal things and how these deviant things must be sanctioned. And they decide what is right or wrong, who is right or wrong. So I'm showing you a picture of Imelda Marcos, which is obviously which is a criminal. Let's just be honest with it. No? She's a criminal based on the decision that was made by the court in relation to her issues, in relation to, the graft and plunder. So ayan nga, nakita nyo in the picture, she's a convicted graft and plunderer. And then when you hear stories about you know, old people doing petty crimes like stealing canned goods from a supermarket, and they immediately get into jail without being able to bail themselves out. While you see someone like her who obviously has a lot of power, traversing down in history when their family were the most powerful in this country, and she's able to access that. And the people who are poor aren't able to access that even with the same age. We can really see that who decides what is right in society are those in power. Now, C. Wright Mills basically further identified who are the power elite and how do they connive in order to be able to create what is good and right in society. So, according to C. Wright Mills, the power elite are the bourgeois, no, the corporations, CEOs, company presidents, major stakeholders, shareholders, etc., etc. And then we have the political elites, who are the political leaders, no, the president, the legislatives, the executives, the judiciary, and then we also have the military, because the military and the police, because they are the ones who does the reinforcing. So the extent to which they do the reinforcing also gives a lot of power to them, and together they consider what is good and right in society, what is bad in society, how should the bad things be sanctioned, who should be sanctioned. And we've seen these stories over and over again. Like, for example, in the drug war, for instance, we see more small-time drug pushers being killed compared to big drug lords, because drug lords are considered also as power elites. No, we see rich rapists getting away from their crimes when they apply their rape on poor women and women of color. We see people getting jailed because of simple quarantine violations, like not wearing a mask, or getting out, or not practicing social distancing. And we see, high military personnel. We see very high elected and assigned officials, violating the same rules, doing mass gatherings, but they don't get the same sanctions as the people who do little quarantine violations. And so we can always say law is the law, but we always have to ask, who wrote the law? And second, who is the law serving? 3, who implements and executes the law? Because this question basically helps us understand why there is an inequality and diversity in the way law is applied or understood in a given society. Now, symbolic interactionism, if you remember, has something to do with, how meanings are created and socially constructed in society through our social interactions as individuals and groups. And one of the theories that is under that to understand deviance is labeling theory. And again, if you remember, the basic thing about deviance in a sociological perspective is that it's deviant when its society labels it as deviant, because certain societies do not label the same thing as deviant. Like, for example, in the Philippines, although we don't like people getting late, it's kind of normalized that, we have a Filipino time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes late. It's kind of normalized. But if you go to Singapore, that is something that's inconceivable to them. Being late to a meeting without a legitimate reason, that is inconceivable to them. So anyway, labeling theory argues that, again, that people become deviant because society or the social interactions that they've had labels them as deviant. And according to labeling theory, there's what we call a primary deviance and a secondary deviance. Primary deviance is a deviant label that is basically just something that describes a person action and doesn't really change the person's persona or status or role, no? Like for example, if a person, yun nga yung example nga nila na if a child is very good, and then that child basically skipped class, probably that child will be labeled as someone na, oh, this child skipped class for once and we will never talk about it again. So he's just labeled the deviant for that specific time that he committed the deviant behavior. There's also what we call secondary deviance, wherein we label a person deviant, and that deviant label becomes that person's master status, no? And there's so many examples that we can do for this. Like for example, when you call somebody, pardon for the word, slut, and this person personifies being a slut, because that becomes the person's thing, that becomes the person's activity, because all around, all the people are considering her a slut, and so she starts believing that maybe this is who I am, maybe this is really what I should do. And if you've watched Easy A, so this is that's the picture, in this slide. This is an example of how this woman, who, because of so many rumors about her allegedly sleeping with somebody at a party, the rumor started spreading out that she is a slut. And she suddenly, like, because she was so frustrated, she said, akala nyo sige, I'll embody what you think I am. So she started acting as a stereotypical, pardon for the word again, slut. So, and basically this is a story of how she maintained that label, but that was just a label, because behind the scenes she never really did or committed any sexual act or intercourse, and that was the comedy in that movie. So yeah, and then apparently when your deviance becomes your master status, it causes stigma. And another form of deviance in our society is disease or sickness, no? Like for example, if a person gets diagnosed with HIV, and the reason why people do not or are uncomfortable in sharing that they have HIV is because it could easily become a secondary deviance. It could easily become their master status. And when that becomes your master status, that could be a source of stigma to you. This is according to Goffman, the same Goffman who talk about the dramaturgical analysis. And that is the reason why we shouldn't say who are the ones who got COVID-19, because we know that COVID-19, we label that as a deviant entity. And therefore, when that is attached to a person, that could easily be a secondary deviance where that person can build into his master status and can influence the way people can socially interact with that person and cause stigma and discrimination. And we've had this many issues, like for example, hindi pinapauwi yung COVID-19 positive, yung mga nurses who are caring for patients who are COVID-19, sinasabuyan sila ng asido. So this kind of discriminatory acts could be explained by the labeling theory as well. Another theory under symbolic interactionism is differential association by Edwin Sutherland, and according to him, individuals learn deviant behavior from those close to them who provide models and opportunities of deviance. So again, the way we act and the social meanings of our behavior are influenced by our social interactions. And if the people we socially interact with most of the time also are engaged in criminal or deviant behavior, then we would think through the meaning making that we make with the persons that we interact with, as that is something that's normal, something that's okay to do. Okay? Next, we have control theory, and by Travis Hershey, and he argued that social control is directly affected by the strength of social bonds, and that deviance results from a feeling of disconnection from society. So usually when you hear about stories about villains like Joker or tawag dito, or serial killers, one of the things that is common to some of them is that they lack the sense of belongingness in a community or in society, and therefore their meanings about society and their social meanings about reality also change, and this can cause them to have lesser impulses to do the correct thing. Now let's go to crimes. Now, all crimes are deviants, but not all deviants are crimes. So again, picking your nose in public, farting in an elevator, these are deviant behaviors, but they're not crimes. Now, what differentiates crime with deviance or normal deviance is that crime as a deviance is basically a violation of a codified law and is punishable through formal sanctions. And there's law and policies that supports what crime is, and usually it's the violation of the criminal law, no, in its most basic sense. Now, crimes could be categorized based on the following. First, we have violent crimes, which are crimes against persons like murder or rape, and we have non-violent crimes, which are crimes against properties like tawag dito, like theft, robbery, arson. And then we also have victimless crimes. Victimless crimes are those na walang victims, no? Like for example, gambling or drug abuse. And then we can further differentiate the type of crime based on who is doing the crime. Now, we have, those who do petty crimes like murder, theft, robbery. These are street crimes. But we also have corporate crime or white-collar crimes. These are crimes that are done at a corporate level. Like for example, embezzlement, fraud, estafa. So these are examples of white-collar crimes. And then, hindi nabanggit in the video, but there are also what we call hate crimes, and these are crimes that are committed against a group of people that are usually minoritized or discriminated against, like people of color and LGBTQIA people. So, in the video, what Nicole explained was the US-based criminal justice system. In the Philippines, we have a different way of looking at the criminal justice system. Instead of having just 3 pillars, we have 4 pillars. Now, we have the law enforcement pillar, wherein, again, the person is apprehended by the police or whoever is tasked to enforce that law. And then we have the prosecution pillar, wherein a case is filed against that person, and that person is prosecuted. Again, for the law enforcement pillar, if the evidence is not sufficient, then we can already end it there and revert them back to the community. If in the prosecution there's no probable cause that could continue hearing during the arraignment, then mare-revert siya back to the community. Pero if there's sufficient cause during the arraignment, then they will proceed to the courts pillar. And the courts pillar now is where we try the person's case, and if there's not enough evidence and it has been proven that there is no reason to suspect that this person could be convicted in that crime, then he goes back to the community or she goes back to the community. And then we have if they are convicted, then they go to a corrections pillar. Ito na yung jail or rehabilitation centers, and eventually they will serve their time there, and if they live long enough for them to be able to serve their time, then we go to the community pillar. So the goal of the corrections pillar, the jail, is to rehabilitate the person, to re-socialize the person. But of course, based on what we're seeing in terms of the environment that they have inside the jails and the prisons, it seems like there's no rehabilitation happening, and actually they are at risk for more social and health problems because of the many problems and issues that could be arising from a very congested prison. And of course, the community also has a role in terms of rehabilitating the person who has wronged the law. Now, basically, the issue that we have, especially in the Philippines, is one, law accessibility and law literacy is something that's very low, especially to the common Filipino. Most Filipinos don't know their rights in relation to, defending themselves. And usually our public defense systems, just like the US, is not that efficient because public attorneys, they aren't paid well, they're overworked, so the tendency for them is not to be able to you know work as efficiently as we would want to protect those who cannot have access to legal assistance, because private legal consultation and private legal services are very, very expensive. So that also now gets us back to the conflict theory, wherein the accessibility for law, the accessibility for defense is also influenced by the social standing. If you can pay for the bail, then you can go out. If you can't, then you stay in prison while you wait for the courts. Another big problem is that because some of our courts are not that time efficient, the process or the time before a certain person could get his or her case heard, even in the arraignment, takes up to 6 months. No? Ibig sabihin, kung nahuli ka today for, let's say, shoplifting, and nakulong ka, and yun ang nangyari, what happens now is that you will be in prison and you might have to wait up until 6 months just to get your first arraignment. And some of them even, nung day ng arraignment nila, absent or may sakit yung judge. So they have to wait again for another free time in another day. So that's the reason why some of our jails are super congested, because some of them are really just waiting for their arraignment. And just imagine, while waiting for your arraignment, you're not really convicted. So some of them could have just been, suspects, but are actually innocent. And they've spent, bad time in jail already. And then, of course, after corrections pillar, after they get to be reintegrated in the community, they will always have and forever have that criminal record. And that could cause them to have difficulty in getting a new job, because in the Philippines, organizations and companies can legally refuse people and to hire them when they have criminal records. And so the tendency for them is to be able to get to the unacceptable means again, as Robert Merton explained, and eventually get in the jails again and go through the same process again. So when we utter the words law is law, we have to always remember that there are many social contexts and there are many complications in the system that prohibits us to just look at law is law as a vacuum statement to apply to every criminal, to every suspected or alleged suspect for a certain crime. So there. Now, this is the latest crime situation update that I could get. This is not even whole of Philippines. Now, this is just NCR. And this is basically how PNP kind of mixed statistics about the crimes. And these are the crimes that they usually log in and present to a public forum. So we have murder, homicide, physical injury, and rape for crime versus persons. And then we also have robbery, theft, carnapping for crime against property. And then we see here that there is in the last 3 years or 4 years, we had a decrease in most of the crimes, and probably it's because of the current regime's commitment, to be tough on crime as well. And then, however, we see that there is a huge increase in murder, and this could be connected very much to the extrajudicial killings, the alleged extrajudicial killings that are being pointed out by the Human Rights Watch of UN. And again, we are looking at this, and we always have to remember, when we see statistics like this of crime, we always have to remember that these are listed because these are reported to the police. And we know in society, especially in the Philippines, that not all crimes are reported to the police. No? So, I was trying to access a victimization survey by the PNP. Wala akong makita. So, that could have given us like a better snapshot of really the extent of crimes that are happening in a given local, but we don't have that. So I think one of the things that could help us further understand the crime situation in the Philippines is, aside from understanding the social context, is having, real time and live data. Actually, there's a data that they showed recently, that they showed that all crimes have been cut in half since quarantine happened. And of course, that is something that we expect because first and foremost, we are in quarantine, so not everyone is going out. There's a liquor ban, so any substances that will induce you to do crime might, is already depleted. And third, since it's quarantine, if crime is happening, then you are disincentivized to go to a police station to go for a report. Kasi nga, bawal lumabas. So, eventually, that's how we can explain. But it's, of course, it's nice to know that, there are a lot of crimes that are going down because of the quarantine, like by half, which is nice to hear. But of course, there are social factors to it. That's why it happened. And my fear lang is that hopefully, most of the crimes that happen within the household, like domestic abuse and child abuse, sana na-report din sila. So in this supplemental lecture, we were able to discuss about deviance, the nature of deviance from a sociological perspective, the different theories understanding deviance from the three major sociological paradigms, and we discussed about the crime and just gave a short commentary on the crime situation in the Philippines.